What if we took FNAF theories, but we made them bad?
Holy shit, it's Freddy Fazbear.
The Five Nights at Freddy's theory space is no stranger to, theories. And while most of them conflict with each other in some way, they all end up fulfilling some kind of purpose in the greater narrative of the FNAF lore. I have many YouTuber friends who disagree with me on plenty of things, and the fandom at large debates topics like the identity of Golden Freddy, the true find Midnight Motorist, and more every single day. But what if there was a theory that 99.99999% of people hated? What if there was a theory so egregiously wrong and outdated that every single person I asked about it said it was worse than Matpat and Freddy? Well, there is. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Because the person who made this theory so popular might be someone you're familiar with.
Gregory, do you see that bit of green spinach in your tea?
Before I dunk on this theory, fair warning, as a FNAF theorist, it's my job to give you, the viewer, new and interesting content to think about in order to build a complete FNAF lore timeline. Some of the theories I propose can directly conflict with each other, and that's normal if we want to get a better understanding of the lore. This video will go over one of the most incorrect FNAF theories I have ever seen, in my opinion. But it is in no way a jab at believers of the theory, so if you see someone believe the theory I'm going to talk about somewhere online, do not harass or bully them, okay? With that out of the way. Oh no. Alright, let me introduce you to the topic of today's video, and the thing I'll be making fun of for the entire runtime of this video. A little theory referred to by the FNAF Theory Wiki as MikeVictim. Yeah, that's right, I'm not talking about Wilk here today. FNAF theories usually have shortened names to explain their premise in a few words, which usually ends up in ridiculously convoluted names like Dead God Theory, Molten MCI, Alter S, and Bite Victim, the one you shouldn't have killed, that would probably give the average FNAF fan an aneurysm. Anyway, MikeVictim is no different. MikeVictim is a theory that Michael Afton, the eldest son of William Afton, who ends up getting scooped and attempts to end the legacy of Fazbear Entertainment, and the Bite Victim, the kid who gets killed in the FNAF 4 minigames after the Bite of 83, are the same person. This goes against a lot of the fandom's interpretations about these two characters, and for good reason. Now, you might be asking yourself, why should I care about some small theory that no one's ever believed in? Well, the thing is, this wasn't always a joke in the community. As little as 6 or 7 years ago, this theory was widely spread and regarded as canon, all because of one person. Matpat.
Gregory, do you see that bit of green spinach in your tea?
That's right. For years, Matpat and some of the biggest theorists in the space believed MikeVictim, and strongly pushed it in every new Game Theory FNAF upload until newer information came out. But why? How could anyone believe a theory that in retrospect feels so incredibly wrong? And anyway, what about it makes so little sense? Yeah, dude, I'm gonna keep it real with you, I have no idea. Before we go over the history of MikeVictim and the early theorists who believed it, let's talk about the theory itself and some of the basic evidence surrounding it. As I said earlier, MikeVictim is the theory that Michael Afton and the FNAF 4 Bite Victim are one and the same. The majority of the evidence for this theory comes from Sister Location and the Survival Logbook. At the end of FNAF 4, the Fredbear plush tells Crying Child that he'll put him back together. We know Afton studied robotics and souls after the child's death, so who's to say he didn't bring him back as a robot? The evidence goes further. In Sister Location, Michael miraculously survives an otherwise fatal injury and comes back to life through Remnant. We've never seen a human do this, only an animatronic. As well as that, the primary control module is filled with small robotic recreations of humans, almost as if Afton was trying to recreate the spark of life. Additionally, if in Ballora Gallery you press 0 and 1 simultaneously for 100 seconds, you'll see a blue screen full of random numbers blocking your vision. Almost like Michael's digital systems crashed. This sub-theory of MikeVictim was called MikeBot, but there was a different, more popular version called Mike Revival. I'll go over them both interchangeably because they're pretty much the same thing. Later on in the Sister Location Custom Night minigames, theorists noticed that Michael's sprite had the same hair color and skin tone as BV, and that Michael's experiences in Sister Location and the appearance of the Nightmare Experiment could be a callback to the Bite Victim. Now, you might be noticing something about this theory. It doesn't actually explain the most important part, how Mike came back in the first place. And this is a big problem in a lot of narrative theories like this, where they just don't explain major parts of the story. But this is particularly egregious because saying the only guy in the franchise whose corpse canonically rots away is a robot or is already dead is...
Gregory, do you see that bit of green spinach in your tea?
Now, obviously there's the whole option of Mike being revived after the bite through soul magic and not as a robot, but that's a whole other can of worms because pretty much all the evidence for this comes from games in the modern era, and even then it's still kind of silly. Like, yeah, I know Grim Foxy's standing outside a graveyard in Curse of Dreadbear. Yeah, I know Foxy can be used to represent Michael. Wait a minute, isn't Michael the crying child, and if he's a crying child, that means he isn't represented by Foxy. No, but actually Dreadbear is crying child because he rebuilt his brain and he's a variant of Fredbear. Well, what's Foxy's bum-ass doing then? MikeVictim is the theory that honestly hinges on a lot of intentional misunderstandings of the franchise, because at this point it's pretty easy to accept that the Foxy Bro narrative is the correct one. Aside from the whole revival thing, you've got Foxy's appearances in media like the Survival Logbook and Step Closer, where he pretty clearly represents Michael. By the way, on the topic of those two books, they're responsible for the rise of MikeVictim and the fall of MikeVictim respectively, so let's talk about them. The first video Matpat made about the Survival Logbook was Game Theory FNAF 6 Stumped Me, and this one's,
Now, most of you are probably confused about that opening reference, which means that you haven't implanted Scott Cawthon with an RFID tracker that follows his every movement. Fortunately, I have, which means that I can tell you two things. One, Scott spends a lot of time on the toilet. Gotta stop maxing out the spicy salsa at Chipotle, Scotty C.
Matt ends off the video by promising a big theory coming soon. And sure enough, shortly after that first video, we got Game Theory, FNAF, the theory that changed everything. And sure enough, in this video, Matpat used the evidence I already went over and some more things from the logbook to seemingly confirm MikeVictim as the new hot theory. But here's the thing. If you really think about it, this makes no sense. The logbook has three characters talking through it. Mike, the red pen, the faded text, which speaks in faded pencil, and the altered text, which speaks through altering the letters found in the book. Matpat completely neglected the altered text and what it says in places like the word search and the activity pages, so his narrative of the faded text speaking to Mike, which is what the theory hinged on, falls apart just like that. Looking back, every single question the faded text asks is answered by the altered text, not the red pen. Anyway, Matpat continued defending MikeVictim until the fourth book in the Fazbear Fright series released, Step Closer. The main story of Step Closer is called, you guessed it, Step Closer. We follow our main character, Pete Dinglewood. Scott Cawthon is the greatest writer ever.
Gotta stop maxing out the spicy salsa at Chipotle, Scotty C.
We follow our main character, Pete Dinglewood, who's forced to look after his younger brother Chuck after his parents' divorce. He takes him to Freddy's, where he tries to prank him with the Foxy animatronic, knowing Chuck is scared of the Fazbear characters. Foxy starts singing, and Pete feels like he's been cursed, and as the days go by, he nearly loses his arm or eye multiple times. Finally, on the way to try and put an end to the torment, he's hit by a car, and dies. But he doesn't just die, no. He possesses his own body. Matpat's world must have crumbled when he read this story, because this is the most obvious Michael and the Crying Child as separate character story Scott could have possibly made. Additionally, there's the detail of Mike from the Survival Logbook and Pete both being hopelessly addicted to watermelon gum, which is what convinced Matpat that MikeVictim couldn't possibly be true. The gum connection actually reappeared in one of the more recent FNAF books the week before. In it, Ralph, the phone guy, finds used gum and gum wrappers all around the pizzeria, around the same time Michael Afton worked at the location. In that same book, Golden Freddy is directly linked to the Bite Victim, throwing a wrench in MikeVictim.
Alright,
back to Matpat. So, with that, on August 1st, 2020, MikeVictim died for good. End of story. Thanks for watching. I understand why Scott Cawthon wrote the Matpat and Prank story now. Oh, come on. Yup, somehow, even in the modern FNAF theory space, MikeVictim is alive and kicking. There's thousands of MikeVictim believers out there somewhere. How? I don't know. Well, I do. Sort of. The thing about most FNAF theories is that while more evidence comes out to confirm them or make them less likely, it's very rare for a theory to be outright debunked. It's only happened like 3 times with Mike Trap, Adult Theory, and Tales games. So regardless of how much new evidence we got in the logbook or Fazbear Frights or the week before, this theory won't ever die until Scott outright says it's not true. One of the biggest pieces of evidence for MikeVictim is Curse of Dreadbear, which I briefly mentioned earlier. The DLC has some imagery of Bite Victim being revived, and while I think that relates to Golden Freddy and how he shares that animatronic with Cassidy, the interpretation that it's showing Michael being revived is also there, and it's not that bad. If we assume MikeVictim, it also explains the FNAF 4 nightmare debate and how I guess both Mike and Crying Child saw the gas station weed animatronics, but I'm gonna be real, I think Crying Child having the nightmares is a big misunderstanding going back all the way to FNAF 4, because every single detail in the night gameplay of that game points to Michael. Crying Child never would have seen the IV drip, the flowers, or the pills because he was in a coma. The FNAF 1 phone guy call plays at rare intervals, which is something only Michael heard. But I'm saying this from a Foxy Bro perspective because I totally get why people think MikeVictim makes FNAF 4 stories simpler. Unfortunately, that's pretty much the only part of the story that MikeVictim improves, because if it's true, the Foxy Bro just completely vanishes from the franchise. Now, obviously there's Midnight Motorist and how the couch person in that minigame has great text like Foxy Bro, but it still throws away such an interesting character that I'm glad was fleshed out in the actual FNAF story. Because let's face it, MikeVictim isn't true, true, it was never true, it will never be true. Ever since Matpat made his first MikeVictim video, Scott has tried clarifying things in his own way, be it with Step Closer, or minor details like the bite of 83 and chewing gum in the week before, or even the Foxy Bro mask and Michael's exotic butters being side by side in the Into the Pit game. And that's kind of my big problem with this franchise, because it's like we never really get answers for anything, and in the rare case we do, we never know for a fact if the old ideas we had years ago were debunked or not. For all I know, Afton being the main character of Midnight Motorist might not be confirmed. I wish. That's why you can still scroll the MikeVictim page on the FNAF Theories wiki and find like 30 evidence points that are recycled by other theories, and also 500 typos. There's just no way of knowing what idea is the right idea, and if we're using that idea in the right way, and what Scott intended, and what Matpat got wrong, and this is getting too deep. What else is there for me to say about MikeVictim? Oh yeah, let's debunk it. Oh my god, where do I even start? To start, there's the most obvious problem. In FNAF 1, you can get jumpscared by Golden Freddy, and if we assume Michael is the player in FNAF 1 and also the bite victim, it wouldn't make sense for Golden Freddy to attack him, considering Cassidy was helping Michael to remember himself in the logbook. One of the big mistakes Matpat made was assuming the faded text was talking to Mike, like we went over earlier. But why would Mike forget his name if he obviously remembers it in FNAF 1 at Sister Location? Michael also has repeated connections to Foxy. In Sister Location, Hand Unit mentions Michael seeing an ad for the job at Circus Babies in a magazine called Screws, Bolts, and Hairpins. In the logbook, Foxy is seen reading a newspaper called Screws, Bolts, and Hairpins. They're just the same guy. If we look towards the modern era, there's the Staffbot family in the security breach silo, showing the Aftons sitting around a dinner table. I go over these Staffbots more in detail in this video, but this table shows one missing a head, the bite victim, one is a magician, William, a female blue-haired one, Mrs. Afton, a circus baby one, Elizabeth, and finally, a balloon boy one, Michael. Looking to the books, there's the obvious connections with Step Closer. During the story, it's mentioned that Pete chews gum excessively, and in the survival logbook, Michael says that he chews gum excessively in a prompt about bad habits. Foxy's a central part of both stories, and at the end of the story, the book literally says Pete's skin looked completely purple, which, you know, I think you know. There's the week before and how Golden Freddy is linked to the restless spirit of a dead child, while also establishing Michael's presence in the pizzeria through used employee badges and gum scattered across the location, which is really important because the book literally says it's a direct prequel to FNAF 1. But even with all that evidence in mind, there's really one thing that makes me despise this theory. Makes me despise MikeVictim and everything it stands for, every single minute piece of narrative that it introduces into the franchise. The story it presents is just not good. Not only does it not explain the entire revival aspect, but it nukes a perfectly good character for no reason, and intentionally overlooks tons of evidence in favor of a cheap, cobbled-together storyline. And I know narrative satisfaction isn't evidence, but come on. MikeVictim is quite possibly one of the worst theories out there, and even though I've spent the entire video talking about why, the simplest answer is that just fucking sucks. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about MikeVictim. Subscribe.